What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and welcome back to Pop Culture Explained. And WandaVision is not what you think it is. As an avid comic book reader and somebody who's been reading Marvel Comics for 25 years, I would like to say that I've pretty much seen it all. But WandaVision did initially throw me for a loop, but I believe that I know exactly what's going on here. Now, there are all kinds of fan theories, right? There's all kinds of fan theories going on out there on what's taking place, on who's involved, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of people are pointing to the idea that it might be Mephisto or Cathone who are basically the ones using Wanda Maximoff and doing all this crazy stuff. I don't think that's actually true, but for the sake of explanation, who are these guys and why do they matter so much? Okay, so starting with Cathone, this guy, his name is spelled C-H-T-H-O-N. He's what we call an elder god, meaning in the early days of Earth was not originally inhabited by humans. Instead, it was inhabited by these just super powerful demonic entities who were all ultimately destroyed. It was weird. You basically had like this thing called the Demiurge, which killed all the elder gods, or most of them, those who didn't escape, and then merged with the sun. It's some crazy stuff from Marvel Comics, but for all intents and purposes, Cathone was one of these elder gods, and he was wildly powerful. He had the ability to channel something called chaos magic, which was just this insanely powerful form of magic. But what ended up happening is after he was defeated and he was banished to his own realm, he's always tried to find ways back to Earth. And the most viable way of doing that was to use Scarlet Witch as an avatar, in the sense that when she was born, Cathone reached out and touched her and imbued her with a fraction of his power, under the idea that at some future point in time, he would be able to seize control of her and then use her to bring his own essence into the world and then basically conquer Earth all over again. Now, the reality of this is that if Cathone ever showed up on Earth in Marvel Comics with full power, nobody would be able to stop him, right? He'd just be this insanely unstoppable being and everybody would lose and die, right? That's just kind of how that is. But during the events of House of M, Scarlet Witch used the full totality of the power that was available to her, presumably all the power that she could use that belonged to Cathone, and she rewrote reality on a universal level, right? Changed the entirety of the universe. And it was kind of crazy the way this went down. She essentially took the mind of Charles Xavier, she read it, and then subconsciously learned or learned the subconscious desires of everybody on Earth, and then recreated reality to give everybody everything they ever wanted. So Magneto, for example, was the leader of the mutant race, which was the ruling class of the world at the time, all kinds of stuff like that. But of course, once the actions of Scarlet Witch were revealed, she was confronted by Doctor Strange and the Avengers and so on and so forth, and then basically set everything back to normal, but said no more mutants, and 98% of the mutant population lost their powers. There's a lot more to the story than that. You can find the story, you can find a link to it down in the description. It's on my Comics Explained channel. I cover the whole thing in its entirety, but that's one of the things that people are pointing out, right? The Cathone is kind of the guy behind this. That little House of M segment will be important later on. But one of the other things here is Mephisto. Now, Mephisto is what we call a demon lord or a hell lord in Marvel Comics. The way that hell works in Marvel, it's not really depicted the way it's done in Judeo-Christianity, for example, where it's ruled by like one guy and it's just a place of suffering. It's not really that way. Instead, in Marvel Comics, hell is kind of like this giant geographical place. We can call it the United States, and that if each one of these states was governed by a hell lord, that's what hell in Marvel Comics would be. So say, for example, that like Texas is ruled by Mephisto, then that's how it would work in the realm of hell in Marvel Comics. Mephisto just rules one segment, but the way this guy works is, say, for example, that we look at the events of Avengers Endgame, and if you guys recall that exchange where Scarlet Witch confronts Thanos and then says, "You took everything from me," if she had immediately followed that statement with, "and I would do anything to get it back," then if we were reading that in Marvel Comics, everything would stop, right? All time would just stop and everybody would freeze where they are. And then Mephisto would just appear, probably like a snake or just Mephisto in his proper form, or he might show up in the form of Vision, whatever form he can take that would be most conducive to getting Wanda to accept his offer. And his offer would come in the form of, what would you be willing to do to get back everything that you previously lost? You know, what would you be willing to sacrifice, right? Would you do anything? Would you make a deal with the devil in order to make it happen? And she would probably say yes. And he would say, "Okay, cool, deal's done. Here's Vision." And she would bring Vision back, but he wouldn't have any of his character traits, right? It's just kind of the way that Mephisto screws with people, right? So like, he'll bring back the person you want most, but then like 3 days later, they'll die of a brain aneurysm or something along those lines, right? He's just a dick is really all he is. But that's how Mephisto would work, right? He would bring back Vision, but Vision would not have any of his personality traits. He would just be this android that existed out there that didn't really have any personality whatsoever. But the other thing that happens with Mephisto is that once you end up making a deal with him, when the time comes where you die, he gets your soul, right? So he basically takes your soul back to his own realm in the plane of hell. I don't think any of that is what's going on in WandaVision. I don't think any of that is what's happening here. One of the first things I think we need to understand here is that Wanda made things this way, and both she and Vision know this. The other thing to understand here is that Scarlet Witch's powers, as she's using them now, most likely resemble something like the Jaspers Warp, right? For those of you guys who don't know what that is, the Jaspers Warp is a concept from Marvel Comics whereby Mad Jim Jaspers has started distorting reality within his localized space on Earth, but it started spreading outward. It created this cascading effect that started to spread throughout the universe, and they actually had to obliterate his universe to keep it from spreading into the multiverse. So he was viewed as something like a cancer or a tumor. Now, this is a really important thing to understand because of a story that Marvel wrote not too long ago called Phoenix Resurrection. And Phoenix Resurrection was a story that basically dealt with the return of Jean Grey, but it wasn't as though Jean Grey as the Phoenix had just popped up all of a sudden. Instead, what happened is the X-Men started picking up on these weird little energy signatures from around the world, and then ultimately traced them to a place where the energy signatures seemed to stop and coalesce. And what they found was this small little town where Jean Grey had basically recreated her life the way she wanted it to be. But this is an important thing, because if we take all this stuff that we've talked about here, we wrap all of this around and we look at the different clues that we've seen just over the course of the first 2 episodes, this all points to the idea that nothing's what we think it is. I think what's really happening here in WandaVision is that in the aftermath of Avengers Infinity War, right? So Wanda basically experiencing a psychotic break with the death of Vision, having had the death of her brother take place in Age of Ultron, having the death of her parents happen when she was younger, literally being surrounded by death and loss so frequently, she just snapped. And by whatever manner and whatever means, which we don't really know, she basically just created this perfect world for herself. And so what this means is that when you look at somebody like Dottie, that Dottie may very well just be a person who was there, right? Just a person who was in this town that Wanda just chose, perhaps, and that she was living her life and doing her own thing. And all the various people that we see there are all basically playing roles that Wanda has imposed on them. It's why if you look at that situation where the voice comes on the radio, right? Jimmy Woo comes on the radio and he says, "Wanda, who did this to you?" That Dottie's saying things like, "I don't believe you," right? When Wanda says like, "Look, we're here to just, enjoy our lives and we don't mean anybody any harm or anything like that." Like Dottie says, "I don't believe you." And she becomes like really cruel, really mean, really fast, and then seems to kind of snap out of it. Like, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And then the radio kind of crackles and then the voice goes away. And then suddenly Dottie goes back to where she was before. I think that is the Marvel Cinematic Universe tying in the idea of Wanda Maximoff's kids, right? That when Agatha Harkness was a babysitter for Wanda Maximoff in the 2nd volume of Vision and Scarlet Witch, and she was babysitting their kids, she realized that whenever Wanda Maximoff's concentration was broken, her kids would disappear. And that's when she realized her kids were not actually kids. They were just constructs that Wanda had created. That's what it looks like it was in that situation. When the voice came on the radio and distracted her, the illusion started to fade, even if only for a moment. And that's why Dottie snapped back to her normal self, like, "Who the hell are you? Like, what's going on here?" And then as soon as Scarlet Witch regained control, then basically Dottie went back to being the person that she was before. Now, this also begs the question, why do we see characters like Geraldine? Why do we see characters like Agatha Harkness, who's basically Agnes in the WandaVision TV show? I think they're there because they're trying to either find some way to snap Wanda out of what she's going through, or because they're spies to keep an eye on what's going on, to see what's happening, and to basically report back to S.W.O.R.D. Now, this is where things get a little murky here, because S.W.O.R.D. in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as we see it here, is not S.W.O.R.D. as we traditionally know it. S.W.O.R.D. basically stands for Sentient Weapon Observation and Response Department. And we could largely assume that S.W.O.R.D. came in the aftermath of like the first Avengers movie, or even going back further than that, when we saw the Avengers film and Nick Fury was talking about how they developed all these tools and weapons and things like that. And when the question was asked why, he pointed the finger to Thor and he said because Thor revealed to them that humanity was not alone in the universe, right? That there was other life out there, and S.H.I.E.L.D. had to be prepared for it. And so that's when they began preparing for the development of S.W.O.R.D. We don't really know yet, right? We don't have all the answers in terms of how S.W.O.R.D. came into existence. But if that's truly the case, then it makes sense, right? Because Geraldine is basically Monica Rambeau, right? She's the little girl that you saw in Captain Marvel who would eventually grow up to become the superhero Spectrum that has the ability to manipulate the entirety of every form of energy that exists out there. Now, whether she actually will in the MCU, I don't really know. But again, at this point, we're all really just guessing. We don't have any definitive answers here. But if I'm a betting man, I think that's exactly what's going on. That everything we're seeing in WandaVision in terms of her like making stuff appear and disappear, that's all really happening. She's altering reality. She's learning about her powers as she uses them. She's doing things that she's never done before. And the result is that it's changing things across the entirety of the universe, that is having this cascade wave that could spread possibly into the multiverse, setting the stage for Doctor Strange 2. Basically, it's one movie that's a giant cleanup job. But that's what I think is happening, right? I think this is all just Wanda Maximoff's doing. I think this is all her, like she's totally aware of what she's doing. She's not oblivious to it. She knows what's happening. And if there is a bad guy in this story, it's her. She's the one that's basically doing things. And I guess, you know, the bad guy-esque concept will come in the form of her eventually losing control, of her making so many changes that she can't undo them, right? The single biggest thing that points to this is her rewinding time after the beekeeper came out of the sewer. She just says no, and like rewinds everything, and then the beekeeper never came out of the sewer. She's actively keeping S.W.O.R.D. out of this world she's created because she doesn't want anybody to make any adjustments to it. Now, of course, the last thing this asks us here is, why does WandaVision look the way that it does, right? Why do we have WandaVision existing in the form of like some old black and white TV shows that were basically modeled after I Love Lucy and the Dick Van Dyke Show? I think a lot of that is because those are the shows that Wanda Maximoff grew up on. When she was a little kid and she was living in Sokovia and she was watching shows, those are the kind of shows that she was watching. And so it makes perfect sense that if she's gone through all this struggle and all this strife and she wants the quote unquote perfect life for herself, she would model her life after what she saw as being the perfect life, which is what she saw on TV. So it makes sense that that kind of stuff would happen, right? This is kind of what's going on. But, you know, let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. I'm curious what your opinions are. And yeah, if you guys are new here to Pop Culture Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.